going to acknowledge several people on here. First of all, Don Southard, who is the person who brought your organization to my attention and said he thought that you all would be interested in what we're doing. So Don, thank you. And to Mike and Phil, thank you both. They changed the speaker schedule because Dr. Charron happened to be in the United States, and so they made a place in the schedule for him to be with you this evening. I'm also going to acknowledge Patrick Rombault, who had the wisdom to start and fund the research for the process of storing white blood cells. Bo Hayner, who had the wisdom to bring it to the United States so it was available to all of us. And of course, to Dominique Charron, who is the professor of immunology at the University of Paris and the head of the immunology team at the Hospital St. Louis, and he'll say it differently than I do. But if you look at your newsletter tonight, and since we're running short of time, he has written many articles. He has spoken internationally on the subject of immunology, and I'd like to present him here tonight.
Thank you, Roberta. This is very nice. And St. Louis or Saint Louis is really similar. It's the same place where I work, and it's also an American city. 25 years ago, I could have come here as a neighbor. It would not have cost more anyway. So this is because I was living in Los Altos Hills and studying at Stanford for several years. Then I've decided, but I see you have decided on this side of the world to do the same, to try to have a smart life. And so I see you can have a smart life here, and listening to the speaker, listening to your question, listening to the answer, listening to you. I am convinced this is a place for smart life. I just want to say that there's another place where we compete for smart life, and you're welcome to join. It's Paris, so I think that competition is a very good one. You have heard a very elegant presentation from Steve about a drug and a chemical that has great effect, but also in some situation, whether it's alleged or real, some great danger and toxicity. This is a case of chemical, and I'm not going to talk to you about chemical. I'm going to talk to you about something which is natural, your own cells. So you know they are natural because you have them in your body, and that's what we will be talking about. So I just put this slide you have here to remind all of us that time is going by, and that actually the immune clock is also ticking. Last time I gave this talk, and a few of you I recognize were down in Monterey to hear me. I said, well, time is ticking. So, but I think I have made that correction. People found that funny. I don't know if I found that funny, but it's so I don't know if time is tickling. Sometimes it does actually. It tickles our mind and tickles our body. So, but in this case, it's the immune clock. So what I would like to, this is just to present myself very briefly. This is for information. This is not for presentation, and it has already been done. But what I'm going to talk to you about, it's autologous white blood cells. So the white blood cell, your blood cells, the white part of your blood cell. And autologous, I understand sometimes people don't catch the meaning of autologous. Many of you do, but it's just simple. It's your cell. It's your own cells. That's what it means. And now those cells, if they are kept and if they are stored, and you have now this possibility before that they age, then they can be useful for your future in terms of prevention, but also in terms of being used for different treatment. So just a very brief review of blood cells medicine. This is really something that has been a 20th century adventure. Okay? It started by discovering new genetic systems. The ABO genetic system, what we call the blood group, red blood cell group, this is the genetic system of the red blood cell, was discovered in the 90s and in the 1930s by Karl Steiner, who was actually awarded 2 Nobel Prizes for that discovery. But I'm not only telling you about Nobel Prizes, I'm also telling you that those Nobel Prizes and those discovery of genetic system led to medicine. You know, this is what led and allowed to perform red blood cell transfusion, blood transfusion in medicine, and probably many of you have benefited or will benefit from blood transfusion. But the blood had also a minor component. Minor was quantitative in that sense. And this minor component are the lymphocyte. And the lymphocyte has also a genetic system. That genetic system, probably unfortunately, but also fortunately, because this is because of that genetic system that we are all here. Without that genetic system, we will be all dead by encountering the first bug in our route of evolution. So that genetic system was discovered by Jean Dosset in Paris, in my institute, actually in my lab, because I am his successor in his lab. He asked me to take over. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1980 for this discovery. And that discovery of the HLA system, the identity of your white blood cell, your biological identity, which means that none of you is identical in terms of your white blood cell, led also to actually the possibility to develop medical procedures that are organ transplantation, and this is bone marrow transplantation. And again, 2 Nobel Prizes were awarded for this, not discovery of the HLA system, but the use of the HLA system in order to actually allow organ transplantation and bone marrow transplantation. So this is just in a simpler slide to tell you the importance in the 20th century of those genetic system of blood which allow blood cell medicine, and actually more than blood cell medicine, transplantation that has really revolutionized actually the medicine in this 21st century and going on into the 21st century. So there is one side that was slightly overlooked, and this is the white blood cell themselves, your own white blood cell, and the white blood cell transfusion. And there's a reason why it was overlooked. Because the white blood cell of someone in this room cannot be used for somebody else. The red blood cell of many of you can be used for your neighbor. Because the genetic system is simple. It is the ABO system. So 1 in 3, 1 in 4 share the same. And you have a universal donor, you have universal recipient, it makes it easy, and it's used practically. Well, if you want in the world, and it is performed now for bone marrow transplantation, to identify an unrelated individual who share with you your HLA system, which means you can benefit from the cell from that individual, either as a lymphocyte or the bone marrow transplantation, and it is actually performed for bone marrow transplantation. Only for 60% of us, you will find an individual if you have a panel of 10 million individuals. And this is the case at the moment. This is the bone marrow donor registry, which contains 10 million. And it will provide a donor for bone marrow transplantation, and there is a search which is done for that. So you see, it's impossible to use in a more regular manner the white blood cell of one person into another person. So this is only your white blood cell which can be used. Transfusion of white blood cell, there were early attempts. But of course what I just said were pitfalls in this sense. granulocytes, which is one part of the white blood cell, were used in the 70s. But probably the more important part was the use in the 90s of what's called donor lymphocyte infusion. This was introduced in a very small number of patients, but now it's common clinical practice in that type of patient. And it was patients that had chronic myeloid leukemia that were transplanted with this chronic myeloid leukemia with a donor that was identified. It could have been a brother or sister, or it could be, as I say, an unrelated donor, which was selected in this panel of 10 million that we know, and we're able, given the HLA type that we do, to identify. And when those patients were relapsing after transplantation, and there were cases, some were cured, that was fine, but some relapsed, we were able to take those lymphocytes that had been stored from the donor and re-inject. And that will cure the leukemia. That shows that those lymphocytes are able to cure disease and to cure cancer. This is published in journals like Blood, New England Journal of Medicine, and it is since, you know, FDA recommended procedure for all those patients. And not only it was able to provide a cure for those relapse of leukemia, but it was also able, when those patients had infection and they had immune deficiency, had infection like cytomegalovirus infection or Epstein-Barr virus infection, to use them. So I call it subtle autologous because it was the cells from the donor, but in that case, the patient had been transplanted. So the patient and the donor were very similar. So it was really like your own cell and the own cell of the patient which were used, and they were able to treat. So really that introduced the first, I would say, baseline for white blood cell infusion that allowed to do two things, and does allow, and it has been totally documented in animal models and in humans. It provides immune reconstitution, and you can be a preventive immune reconstitution, and for example, it allows to optimize vaccination, and then it allowed to be used for curative purposes in infection or in cancer. So we have in our blood lymphocytes, T cells, B cells, antigen-presenting cells, dendritic cells. Those are names the immunologists use. I'm sorry about those names. For some of you, they can be very complex. But when you have your blood smear, it's easy. I mean, they look slightly different, and they are there. They are your own cell. They are immediately available and operational. But unfortunately, there is something that comes back to my first clock. Time is going by. And there is ample evidence, and I will go through it, that like for other part of our body and other, the skin and different things, the brain also, it doesn't show, and doesn't show too much also for the lymphocytes, and then it declines with time. There is something which is called the immunosenescence, the aging of the immune system. Like aging is aging, you have the aging of the immune system. So what are the data concerning the aging of the immune system, the human aging? And there is epidemiological data which is, totally validated, and not only the statistics show it, but we know it. I mean, the exponential increase in cancer incidence with age is a fact of life, and with life expectancy going higher, this is totally real, due to two things. The genetic alteration. The more time goes, the more genetic alteration occur in cells, then the more cells become cancerous and develop. That's lead to an increased incidence of cancer. But the fight of the immune system against those altered cells. This is the role of the immune system, to fight against foreign pathogen, virus, bacteria. And actually a cancer cell is an abnormal cell which is recognized as foreign the same way, and the system fight. But the fight is won by the cancer as time goes, because the immune system becomes actually less efficient, less competent. The second thing is the number of infection increase and the severity of infection increase. This is something we all know, and many people, unfortunately, have pneumonia and flu, and the percentage of deaths when you are older of flu or pneumonia increase compared when you are younger. I have some data, CDC data, that I can show to you. And of course we have all recommended, and we are recommended to ourselves also, to try to avoid as much as possible those infections. And vaccination is very efficacious for that, flu vaccination. But again, the efficacy of the vaccination with flu is recommended after 65, highly recommended. It's almost mandatory. In France, it's actually reimbursed by the Social Security health insurance system. And I'm sure many of you are vaccinated against flu, and you do that rightly. But you have to know that that vaccine is not as efficacious on you if you are over 65 than if you had taken the same vaccine when you were 40 or when you were 20. And then there is another aspect which I won't dwell into it tonight, but that you have also an increased incidence of some type of immune disease. So it's clear, immune defense vanishes while aging, and this is data which is taken from the NIH statistics, which shows that depending on the age, the incidence of cancer, the incidence of influenza in the different part of, this is in the US, in actually both male and female, you can see those results. They are clear, the number and the percentage clearly show that there is this increase, and this is public data. So, what in the immune system is aging? I'm sure very few of you are immunologists, but it's my passion. So I may take you to quite specialized aspect of immunology, but I think immunology is something which works in you also. So it's not bad for you to know a little about immunology. Immunology, you have two types of lymphocytes, the T lymphocyte and the B lymphocyte. And actually, the B lymphocytes are the ones that produce the antibodies, okay? And what we know is that the stem cells that produce the B lymphocyte decrease with age, and that the antibodies that are produced by the B lymphocytes are antibodies that are of what's called lower titer and of lower affinity. And the number of cells that produce them after vaccination decrease. So that category of B lymphocyte, it's clear it decreases. The good antibody decrease. Unfortunately, the bad one, what's called the polyreactive one, the one that actually causes or are associated with autoimmune disease increase. That totally explains the previous data. For the T cell, this is another story that somebody of you may learn tonight. T cells are of two types. The naive T cells, but most of our T cells are T cells that have been educated. They have been educated during all your life, and the way they are educated is that they actually go through the thymus, which is this organ that is here that decreases with age, and then those cells become what's called memory cells. So they are cells that sit there and they wait actually to encounter the right pathogen they will react. They encounter the enemies they are supposed to fight. And what we have here again is that those cells during the age will decrease. This is just to see what's called the number of cells that go through your thymus to get educated. It's like a school, okay? A school, and this is the success rate at the final examination, okay? When you are 20, well, all your cells go through your thymus, they get well educated, and they get their diploma. Okay, that's good, that's good. This is a good school. The taxpayers, the parents can pay. That's fine. They do it. Well, unfortunately, the school here, okay, doesn't work that well. That school is a little old. They may close the school because really that's not working very well. So that's the same here. Again, I said vaccination. Vaccination is really a very important means in young, in elderly, to prevent infectious disease and actually to cure some patients. And I'm just here referring to the annual flu-related deaths in the US. I have also the French data, which is comparatively statistically the same. You have, if you're over 65, 13-fold higher risk of death from flu than if you are under 64. That really called for vaccination, okay? But unfortunately, as I say, if you look at the efficacy of the flu vaccine, and this is randomized trial, you have less efficacy when you are over 60 than when you are younger. However, it is really something that is very useful. This is also, there's a third type of cells. They are called the monocyte and the dendritic cell. I'm just putting this slide because I think more and more you will hear about monocyte and dendritic cell because they are going to be used and they are used in therapeutic trial and actually treatment of cancer. So there's another thing I just want to say. You, especially in California, you have been exposed by the media to all the debate about stem cells. I'm not going to go into the embryonic versus adult stem cell. I'm just going to talk about adult stem cell. There was a dream, and we had all these dreams, that we have in our body stem cells that are young, they stay young forever, and one day we will take them and we can create a kidney, create a heart, and say, that may be true one day, okay? But one thing which is true is that your number of stem cells and the quality of the stem cell also during the time and during the time of aging will decrease and does decrease. That has been published in Nature, in DNA, as very prominent scientists have described that. So that's been even the stem cell decline. So now I'm becoming very concrete. White blood cell infusion is used, and white blood cell infusion is used presently in a number of patients that are enrolled in either investigative or phase 2, phase 3 clinical trial. And this is just to give you an example, and this is done in the leading university hospital in this area. You have many of those hospitals, and many of my colleagues I am also visiting here are doing this kind of treatment. And in St. Louis Hospital, we are doing treating mostly hematopoietic disease and cancer by transplantation, cell therapy, immune-based therapy. And we have a leading experience. I just want to say that cord blood transplantation was done for the first time in 1988 on an American patient, which was referred to in our institute in St. Louis. And that was the first time of cord blood transplantation in leukemia. And you know, cord blood transplantation now is done in every place in the States and in Europe and in the world. This is just the number of situation and type of cancer in which T-cell immunotherapy or dendritic cell immunotherapy is used in those investigational program. This is again the type of cells. We use more T cells than dendritic cells, but the number of dendritic cells is very high. And there are several trials using what's called natural killer cells. I'm not going into, although we can discuss later on, but there's different thing. And there is real published evidence from leading groups at NIH, a group of Rosenberg, that you can obtain a cancer regression in patients after actually using autologous white blood cells that have been genetically engineered. And this is in the case that is referred here of melanoma patients, which were stage 4 melanoma patients. And I don't want to describe the total procedure, but as you say, you take the peripheral T cell of the patient and actually you manipulate them in the good sense to make them harm against the tumor and against the melanoma, and they kill the melanoma and they induce tumor regression in those patients that had never tumor regression before. There is even a further step. There is a pre-FDA approval of a vaccine against prostate cancer. It's called Provenge. The company that is developing this is Charron, which originated from here and from the Stanford group. And it's a cancer vaccine that, as I say, the panel, the FDA panel, has given a pre-FDA approval, and it will be approved in the next few months or early next year. That means that there will be a recommendation for doctors to actually use this treatment, which would be an approved treatment for prostate cancer. And just to say that prostate cancer is a very prominent cancer. Of course, it's only in half of the population, I mean, fortunately. But the percentage of that population that actually has prostate cancer is very high. Whether that prostate cancer is diagnosed and symptomatic or whether it's not, I just want to give you a result that we all know from many years. At autopsy of males over 85 years old, 90% have prostate cancer. Fortunately, some of this prostate cancer were never actually symptomatic, but that means that the cancer is developing. The aging process is developing the cancer. And as age goes, I mean, people older, then some of them will be symptomatic. So I think this is data that is ineluctable. Also in transplantation and after transplantation, that population becomes very high. Because of immunosuppression, you have this increase. Yeah?
So, Dr. Charron, is it permissible to ask a question?
Yeah, well, of course.
Okay.
It's a pleasure.
What is was the effectiveness of the vaccine for prostate cancer? Did they have any numbers on that?
Oh yes, that's this clinical trial which show actually it was stage 4, very advanced prostate cancer, and they had a prolonged survival of 20% of the lifespan, depending on the different patients. So it will be then applied to a population of cancer less advanced. But as you know, in medicine, you first treat the patients that are the most desperate. If you get a result, even if it's not, you know, the final definitive best result, that allows you to go back and do. So, and especially in the immune system, if this vaccination and possibility works in very advanced cancer, the chance that it can be very effective in earlier cancer, and even it can be effective in prevention, in prophylactic effect, given the result that I just gave you, are very high. So we're really at the beginning of an area that will call for that, I mean, which is doing that. Yeah?
Do you feel that people nowadays are being over-immunized to the point where, I guess, our T cells can't learn how to fight new pathogens on its own?
Well, we are not over-immunized by vaccination, because we get the vaccination when we are babies, you know, and after that we get very few vaccinations. The only vaccination we get normally is a flu vaccination after that. We are immunized by encountering pathogen all the time, okay? But this is good to be immunized. Children that are immunized at school, for example, that gets their cell educated, which means that later in life they will be able to actually fight those infections. So there is only, to my knowledge, a situation where individuals are over-immunized. It's in Africa by parasitic infection. The recurrent parasitic infection in Africa is actually an over-immunization, which leads also to immune depression. So that's very detrimental. In Western country and developed country, there is no real over-immunization. There was another, yeah?
There are various doctors who advise you to take booster shots, tetanus boosters.
Yes, yeah.
Are those efficacious?
Yes, they are efficacious, and they are efficacious the more you're young, over 20. They are efficacious. But as you get older, they are less efficacious. That's why I'm going to mention that we need to have our white blood cells stored before, when we are 50, 60, 70, that when we get that shot when we are 85, then that shot with the cells you get back will be the same efficacy as when you get the shot when you are 60. But do what your doctor say in terms of vaccination. Really, you know, vaccination has saved babies, has saved the world. There are some situations where vaccination has created disease. I'm not going to debate that, but I think many of us have benefited from vaccination, and the population has benefited from vaccination. So that's, but that was a very important comment. Yeah?
Did you say you were working with some people at Stanford?
I was trained at Stanford, and I am working with many people at Stanford, yes.
Now, Stanford has a relationship with VA Palo Alto,
Yeah.
Veterans Administration.
Yeah.
Do you see the Veterans Administration doing anything proactive in this arena?
Well, you know, we are not at that stage. The only thing I can say is that we have on the board of our project 2 people from Stanford, and the head of the blood bank of Stanford, and you know, we are in discussion with all the hospitals, not only Stanford, but also UCSF and all UC San Diego. I was in San Diego also, and it's coming. I mean, you know, so I'm sure they will be proactive. I mean, they have been proactive for many.
They made a mistake by asking the question,
No.
But now let's not have any more questions. So.
Okay, so I can finish. It's not to finish. I enjoy to stay. You say that we can stay the whole night, but maybe some people. Okay, things are simple. Okay, white blood cell. Your white blood cells, they contain all the cells you need to fight cancer, to fight infection. I think I have convinced you with the data. I just repeating that. Now, why will you store your white blood cell? And I will come back early for that later. Why will you store them when they are young compared to when they are old? or because they are in a better shape, because they are more efficacious, because they are able to fight more cancer cells, more infections, disease, and this kind of thing. But there are possibility also to use other cells. So I will compare the two types of other cells that can be used at the moment to do and to develop cell therapy compared to your own white blood cell. Cord blood cell. This is something that has been developed. As I said, the first cord blood transplantation was done in '88 at Hôpital Saint-Louis. And those cells are very good to restore your actually blood system, but not to restore your immune system. It will take, when you do a cord blood transplantation, and we have worked on that, we have published paper, scientific paper on that, it will take 18 months to 24 months for you using your cord blood cell to restore your immune system, to fight infection. So you are really at risk of infection during that whole period. While with a white blood cell, they are immediately efficacious. Second, I hate to say it applies to me, but it also applies to you. I don't think none of you have saved your cord blood. Okay? You may have saved the cord blood of your grandchildren, or of your children, or of your grand-grandchildren, or of your next-to-be children. And someone say, I mean, I'm looking at you, of your future children, you should say. but it's too late for you and me.
No, I took my blood. You fellas have taken my blood, and you would have been right
absolutely, that's the blood.
So, Bankhead.
Absolutely. So, the blood is very important. You cannot store your cord anymore, but you can store your blood. And even if as grandparents or as parents, you store the cord of your child, that child needs parents. They need parents smart, okay, and alive. Is that smart life here? So I think they do that. So you need your white blood cell store. You need also the cord of your child, that's fine. He may use it one day. That's not clear, but it may be used. But you will use your lymphocytes. There's no doubt about it. And stem cell, I told you. Yes?
What do you mean by storing cord blood?
Cord blood. Umbilical cord blood. Sorry, I meant, you know, also I speak English. My English is has some French accent. I mean, my few. And. So for stem cell, I told you, stem cell is something that may be useful one day, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Stem cell has never been really used beside hematopoietic reconstitution for any medical purposes, while white blood cells are current treatment for some infection, some leukemia, as I said, and some cancer treatment. So, as I say, why to choose to preserve your white blood cell to use them later? And there's something, I'm surprised no one has a question. Am I too old to use the cells? Well, it's probably because none of you think you are too old to preserve your white blood cell. And I tell you, you're right, okay? Because your white blood cell when you are 70 are better than your white blood cell than when you are 80 or 90. And this is clear, okay? This is data. This is scientific data I'm talking about, okay? I'm a scientist. I don't say things that are not published and actually reference. So why to use your cells when you are younger and keep them? Well, because the cells are like you. They are younger. That means that they have a capacity of fighting more disease, more cancer cells, more type of cancer cells, more infection, more type of infection. Secondly, they are healthier, and they are taken at a time you don't have a disease, okay? And so that means, and that has been also documented, that say work better. They kill better the cancer cells. This is documented. And then they are safer. There is at present, I am told you, and this is done in the different places, you take lymphocyte to do immunotherapy when you are diagnosed of cancer. There are indications, and very soon it will be in many more people that are diagnosed of cancer. Those cells work, okay? Those protocol works. But there is a danger. There's a danger that those cells are contaminated by what's called cancer stem cell. So there is a risk, and we know that, and that risk causes relapse in different patients. And also we know that those cells are not as efficacious than cells that would have been preserved before. So they are not as safe. And then there is immediate benefit, just, I told you, they are immediately operational. Your lymphocyte, you freeze them, you put them in the bank. I'm not telling you about the process that is behind, but it's totally validated, it's FDA approved, it has all the regulation and safety procedure. And if you need them, they are sent to the doctors, they are sent to the clinical centers that are using them. They can be used immediately, injected back in you, and do what the doctor will use them for.
How do you get enough quantity stored to do any good?
Well, it's a very good question. In the term of lymphocyte and white blood cell, the quantity first is just like a blood draw for blood donation, which is already a large number of lymphocytes. But this is not the quantity of lymphocyte which is important, it's the diversity of lymphocytes, because as I say, they are memory lymphocytes. And you just need a few lymphocytes to fight the pathogen of the disease, because once the lymphocyte, the memory lymphocyte, has encountered the pathogen, that lymphocyte will divide, and it will grow. And you will do the amplification in your body. That's what you do by your own when you have a flu. When you have a flu, you get the flu virus, and it stimulates your lymphocyte. They amplify, and then they cure the infections. So it is exactly the same. Of course, if you need more than one, actually, if you have several diseases in the course of your life, we will recommend, actually we are recommending already that this procedure we are talking about, you should do it as soon as possible, whatever is your age, and probably after that you should do it every 3 to 5 years. I think it will be a reasonable cost time and a reasonable quantity you will store, not for your first disease. Maybe you will never have disease, so you will be happy, you will have cells in the bank, never use the cell in the banks. I think the people that are most happy are the people that have money in the bank and never use the money. That means they don't need the money, they have enough money. So that will be the key. But in that case, it's really the situation. So I will. So I'm just finishing on that. I'm following what he said. He's democratic, but he's also very. So they are immediately operational. So you should follow what he said. No question. But I keep your question. Okay. They are usable to modify them, and as I say, they are also the source of younger stem cell, because the other source of stem cell, which is you, when you're older, the stem cells are older. So this is just to, what I said, to reset the immune clock. And I'm not as good as you. You have animation in your slides, so I should do the animation. I should benefit from you to do that. And this is just to say that, the world of Greece is the origin of medicine, which was a myth at the origin. And then we know that actually allopathic medicine came from Hippocrates with the first school of medicine at Kos. And this is, And preventive medicine is basically Jenner and Pasteur. So this is your predictive medicine is the DNA. I see you have books about DNA. And California, I mean Monterey, because this is the first place you can do that. Could be actually the place where you have a more holistic approach of medicine, but holistic in the right sense, in the good sense, not in the crazy sense sometimes there is. And this is actually could be history in California. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will you allow them to ask questions?
Are we on? Good. We're going to use a slightly different procedure tonight. Whoever wants to ask a question, I'm going to bring the microphone up to them because I'm told that, and I think this is true, that otherwise sometimes the question gets lost. So let me start here with this gentleman nearby.
I understand red blood cells have a lifetime of about 90 days in the blood. How long do the various types of white blood cells remain in the system?
Red blood cells are dead cells. They don't have a nucleus, so they survive in the blood, exactly what you say. The data you say is the real data. White blood cells are cells that are alive. Okay? They have a nucleus, they can replicate, they can multiply, they can divide. And as I say, when they encounter the pathogen, so the memory T cells stay in your body very long time. They stay till the end. But what I say is that the number and the diversity goes down with age. But if you re-inject the one that are from the previous time, they will stay as long, and they are efficacious. Very good question. I am keeping your question too, so don't worry.
Is it possible to take your own, I don't know, white blood cells or whatever, and turn it into your own immune system to make like a vaccination? You take it out of yourself. If you're diagnosed with cancer, and you can take that and turn it around, make a vaccination, and have your own immune system fight that cancer.
This is actually what is done in several different protocols. You arm your arm with a kind of weapon. I mean, the weapon can be genetically engineered, it can be what's called a peptide, it can be a different type, and you put a cassette of the tumor antigen that will elicit. So that's done at the moment. And it's done with cells that are taken at the moment the cancer is diagnosed. What we are proposing here, and this is practice, what in certain type of cancer, pancreatic cancer, for example, it has been done. What I've said about the prostate cancer, it's a vaccination doing exactly what you say, turn your immune system. But the immune system is going down. So to have a better immune system will allow these procedures, the same, to be more efficacious. He is running the show, so I cannot do anything.
When will this be integrated into just regular blood banks? Because we can give blood every 3 months, something like that, and they use the red blood cells. Why not?
Yeah, we are working on it. We are working on it. First, they thought we were competitors, but probably the best. So we were not competitors, we were really colleagues, and that's why we are, director of famous blood bank in our scientific board, and we want to work out the scheme that the white blood cell that is bad for the red cell that will be given to somebody else can be stored for you, and it could even be a reward with those blood bank for the best donors. I mean, this is so there are different schemes, and my colleague here, Boehner, Patrick Rambaud, have been in Monterey working on that, and we are working on that in Europe too.
So has it been worked out what the cost to do this would be if you did this with a wide population of people?
I mean, this is a question that can be answered probably later on, because the structure of cost, you know, is something that is on the business side, and I'm not on the business side. But Bo, can you just say, at the moment, to have your cell taken in the Monterey, what it will cost for the gentleman?
So the cost right now, it's basically, we're doing at cost, and it's about $1,000. And obviously, there's a lot of priority issues. We've got to have all the blood tested. I mean, it's just literally a cost right now.
But isn't there an ongoing storage cost as well?
I'm sorry?
An ongoing storage cost
There's
as
an
well?
annual fee afterwards of $150 a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're hoping to drive that
And
number down.
compared to cord blood actually cost is higher at the moment.
Right.
I think I turned it on.
Hello? Oh. Is it working?
No.
Just yell out.
Just, yeah.
Speak up.
Okay,
that's-
so that, to kind of piggyback on that question, it seems like that might be an inherent problem. It's great to do it if you're young, but it seems like it's really expensive to do it.
No, it's not expensive.
So it is economical?
Well, if you think of an insurance,
Okay.
if you think of what we all spend on things that are not useful, things that can extend your life, the smart life we hope to all have at this cost is really, I don't say, I thought of that, you know, I'm an MD, I'm working in Europe, and the whole health system in Europe is subsidized and things like that. I think if you look at that price, I mean, if you know, many people years ago used to smoke. They spend 10 times that in smoking. Fortunately, we don't smoke, and I learned here not to smoke 20 years ago. Now in Europe, we don't smoke, but we do as a thing. Some of us go to the hairdresser, I mean, this is too many times. I'm not saying you, but to be really honest, I think that amount is reasonable if you look at the benefit. I mean, it may ask you some kind of effort, and I think in the future we will be working on that with, you know, for group at risk, and there could be, you know, as public health discussions there. We have discussion with the Army also. There are all those options that, in the sense of public health, is important. But we are not talking about a procedure which is outrageously expensive at all. I mean, it's I mean, you take yourself many supplements, and you take some chemicals that are useful, and if you look at the cost at the end of the year, you are close to that. For some, I mean, the 28 pills you take, maybe it's probably more, but he can afford the 28 pills plus his white blood cell store.
Hey, Sharon.
Yes, thank you. I had breast cancer 5 years ago, so it's too late for me to store my
No,
white blood
not at all, not at all, because you are in remission of breast cancer. So your cells are actually, of course, the breast cancer treatment has altered your cells for the first 18 months after the treatment. We know that very well because we do that in St. Louis Hospital. But your system, your system has been immune reconstituted. Okay, it has. Okay, so store your white blood cells and store them now. But not because I fear that you will relapse of your cancer. In case you relapse, they will be useful. But that's not for that. That's because you may have in 20 years need them for an infection or need them for something else. I mean, this is really to anticipate the need for a treatment. So it's that situation. If we were in a situation where you are, you know, just 6 months after chemotherapy for breast cancer, for example, I will say wait for a while, okay? But not too long, because we know when the immune reconstitution is present. I mean, And I'm not saying about you, but family of breast cancer do exist. Family of other type of cancer do exist. And I will really highly recommend to those families that the daughter and the sister and all that families, that they should do it. That they should do it. This is really a group that will benefit for it.
Hold on a second.
People can speak up. Then we don't even need the mic.
Yeah, I can move. I can.
Okay. Yeah.
I need to drink.
How many?
This is not vodka.
How many white blood cells do you store? Like, is it just this much or this much? How
You
many?
need the number. You store the number you have in a pint of blood. The one you give when you are a blood donor. You store all of them.
2 billion.
2 billion?
2 billions. But basically, we are not going to take you to take 10 liters if you have lower number of cells. You store, and that's enough. I mean, that's enough for one.
The average is between 1.5 and 3. Some will store 3, some will store 1.5, but in average.
Because we have different numbers. But our immune system works, and it doesn't work by numbers. That's I already answered to you on that, because this is quality and diversity is more important than just number. I mean, you need a sufficient number, because this is it expands by itself.
Is there some type of protocol that you recommend before having this procedure? I'm understanding that just anyone has this, obviously preferably younger, but what are parameters to increase quality of white blood cells before having this done?
First,
people who have bad lifestyles to begin with, just saying,
what is
unhealthy lifestyles.
What is a bad lifestyle? I mean, it's,
unhealthy eating.
Some of us think bad lifestyles is good lifestyle. No, but I just want to answer seriously.
It's not enough wine. That's the bad lifestyle. Not enough wine.
Well, wine helps. So that's.
I take it.
To be more very serious. Your immune system is good, and it is the immune system of your age. There is some individual variation, for example, but there's no way you can enhance the immune system. Overall, I'm an immunologist. I'm professor of immunology in one of the leading centers in the world. I mean, and we have heard of immunostimulatory molecules, chemicals, for the last 30 years. None does exist, okay? The only stimulation of the immune system, I'm sorry to say, there are some people who believe in it, but it is vaccination. Vaccination is great, okay? But your immune system is fine. And so store it now, that's what I will say, as early as possible.
So no protocol you recommend?
No, well, it's done in a very strict, regulated manner. The blood drawing. I don't recommend you to go on the street and to store yourself. Okay? So but do it in Monterey, which is actually the only place where it can be done. You don't have to take drugs before and things like that, because there are, for example, to store your stem cells. Okay, there is situation where for bone marrow transplantation, you offer the possibility to store your stem cell. It works, okay? But you need GCSF, which is actually a procedure. And you do it because there is a medical indication to do that. But there is a toll. And there has been people who actually have died because of the pre-treatment before the drug. So, no manipulation of the immune system, okay, in the normal context.
I wonder if you thought about vitamin D and how it improves the immune system. It's been found to fight about 20 types of cancer, it's also been found recently to fight viral infections as well as bacterial infections. 3 papers came out in the last 6 months, one on influenza, one on common cold, one on bronchitis. And so I think vitamin D does stimulate the immune system.
Oh, there's no doubt that, well, by the way, we are working on vitamin D polymorphism, receptor for vitamin D for the immune system. So this is a field that I know a little, but you know it very well. I'm not claiming that there are no compounds that doesn't stimulate the immune system. That's clear. There is no large data totally validated that to take systematically those compounds will, in terms of public health, in a large population, give results. But, I mean, if that data comes for vitamin D, I will recommend vitamin D. There's no doubt.
Sure.
Because I have a GPS, that's the only way for me.
100 degrees below zero.
Minus 196 Celsius.
Minus 196.9, that's right. And they're stored, as I understand it, in 2 sections. So if you get your first disease, they can break it off, and the doctor can do it. If 2 years later they break it off, they can do it again. Mine, as I mentioned, was stored, and I had the choice. I stored mine between Edith Piaf and Tallulah Bankhead. And I think they're making a comeback on it. But, you know, as Dr. Phil Miller, Steve has told us in the past, we all have a birthday age, which we can't do anything about. But due to this organization, we have a biological age, and I think oftentimes many of us are somewhat younger than our calendar age. And so maybe I'm at the end of the stream, but I sure don't feel like it. And so as a result, I think it's a very small investment.
You give me a good suggestion. For your birthday, for our own birthday, everyone should offer himself his white blood cell.
That's right.
You make your own present.
I agree.
By the way, I guess most people know, but you know, Don, you're 80, right?
81.
81.
Yeah. Wow.
So, you know, this organization does some good, I think.
Well, Phil and Steve and you and the rest of the people have, but I am really excited by what these people are doing down there. And to me, it's cutting-edge technology. My wife went into the hospital to have a blood transfusion here about 2 or 3 months ago. $3,500. Now, she thinks everything I'm doing is nonsense, you know. But basically, that's what it is. I mean, this is a terribly small investment. One of the things that Dr. Charron made at the presentation, saying that a baby's immune system, a baby's white blood cells have no value because that baby has never experienced any illness, and the white blood cells are not educated to perform what you have by the time you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 years old. You've been through a lot of illnesses, and they become well educated, and they're ready for battle.
Another question.
I just wanted to say, if anybody wants to come and visit our lab, we're more than happy to take you on a tour through it, show you how the process is done, show you the bioarchive where the blood cells are stored.
Well, yeah, maybe I said it in a too simple way. There is high technology behind in the freezing procedure, and there is high safety. Because, you know, cells cannot be just frozen in your freezer and they won't survive. I mean, there's a DLC, I mean, that limit de consommation in French. I don't know how it is in English, I mean, but limit date unless you freeze at minus 196. So there's this clear, and there's been cells frozen that are unfrozen, and that works 40 years from the origin. So it's a totally different thing. I just want also to say something, because he would love to be here, I think, and discuss with you. And maybe one day you could invite him. When I was in Monterey for the grand opening in April, somebody came to me and said, Luc Montagnier is here. Professor Montagnier is in the room. And you know, Luc Montagnier discovers the AIDS virus, as you know. He was in the room. He was in the room not because I invited him, not because biobank people invited him, because he has heard of it. He has heard of that work, and he listened to my blog, of course, my talk, and of course I went to say hello to him. I know him personally as a scientist, and we are colleagues, and I respect him very much. But he wanted his blood taken. So that's an example of opinion leader, and that's quite a great opinion leader that has already taken the step for himself. I mean, this is, and yeah, he's 70 years old.
Okay, good. Let's have a couple more questions. Yeah.
Several years ago, I spoke to an oncologist about the possibility of injecting a cancer with a virus and killing the cancer. He says, oh, you might do that, but there are too many foci in the body for the cancer. They might be in several places. You're saying now that this white blood cell therapy could kill, no matter how many foci there are, it can kill them all.
Well, this is already, you know, proven in different settings, because the lymphocytes, they are attracted. I mean, there's a basic immunology phenomenon there. They are attracted by the abnormality of the cell, which is a cancer cell. So it will be attracted to the different foci, the different type of cancer, and to the different location. And this is already what it's how it works, and that's. But he was right to tell you, because there is situation for which chemotherapy or radiotherapy cannot do that. This is true. Chemotherapy, because the vessel situation. I don't know if you know. But the neovascularization is something very important for cancer. And there's a situation where it's disturbed. In the case of lymphocytes, they come through the vessel, but then they infiltrate, and they can go to the tumor. There's even some movies showing the cells infiltrating.
Bill, there's one gentleman here in the front row who's had many questions many times here, and it's never
it should be
right next to Michelle.
Oh, sorry.
No,
Okay.
I was just curious about what happens after 15 years. Do you get freezer burn, or what happens to the cells? Are you in DNA breakdown?
No, yeah, that's the right question. I alluded to. Because of the procedure of freezing the cells, white blood cells are like sperm. They can be stored if they are well stored. It's almost forever. Forever doesn't mean anything. I'm a scientist. It has been documented for 30 years, and it has been seen for more than 40 years. That you freeze cells, you unfreeze them, 40 years later, they work the same. Okay? I have my own personal experience. I had my cell frozen when I was at Stanford. My lab is still using them to do experiments. This is in vitro, where you're not using them for treatment, because at that time that was not the whole thing, but they work. They work. I mean, the only thing is PG&E. I mean, if you have a failure of PG&E, and there is a procedure, like a blood bank. I mean, this is yeah. It's all secure. I mean, it's.
So then, doing it every 5 years is just insurance?
Yes.
But they don't charge you.
No, but I mean, it's even safe the first time you do it. I mean, it's not going to disappear. And,
Doctor, what about, like you say, you store your white blood cells, and 5 years from now, you encountered an infection with the AIDS virus. How do these white cells help with that?
That's a very good question, and this is something I have decided to address with Montagnier, Professor Montagnier, because there is a problem that I don't think we should claim ourselves that we think we will reuse them in the context of HIV, because HIV has a particularity to be as a reservoir of those cells. So if you re-inject white blood cell of someone who has an HIV contamination, it may work very well. It may, but I don't know, that has not been done. But also you re-inject the cell in which the HIV can actually go to. So I think there are things we don't know, and there are things we have to investigate, and it's a very good question, and it's a very important fundamental question. And I will say that given the evolution of HIV and of the treatment now that lowers the virus load, as you know, very efficacious in a very efficacious way, HIV is becoming a chronic disease, and in that setting of chronic disease, for most of the patients, unfortunately some it's more active disease. In that situation, the re-injection of lymphocyte may be of use. There is theoretical possibilities there. We have to do the clinical trial, and that's something we will be planning in the future. We are really at the very beginning of different type of application. That's one possibility. That one, I think we really need to be very cautious with it, but it may work. I mean, it's clearly of potential benefit. There are also situations that we haven't encountered, fortunately, but in the case of a dirty bomb in the tube in Paris or in New York, I mean, there will be a problem for our immune system. To have all the people that had their cells stored before will be probably useful. I hope we won't have to do that study, but you never know.
Yeah, in case of the avian flu as well,
yeah.
To produce a vaccine takes 9 months, because you have to do it through the eggs process. And there will be a possibility to do an activation in vitro. In some way you vaccine your lymphocyte in vitro before the re-injection, and then you don't need to wait 9 months to have the vaccine done, as soon as the virus is identified. And as you know, avian flu is not going to be an if, it's a when, in 48 days.
Thank you.
Let's say you do store your white blood cells, and 20 years later you have an infection. How do you convince your doctor to use them?
Well, your doctors are convinced by medical practice, common medical practice. And already that situation does exist, as I say, for donor lymphocyte infusion. If you have a CMV infection, and if you have been a chronic myeloid leukemia patient, you will get that treatment. Okay? Not with cells that have been stored, because we don't have them stored for before, but with cells regularly. If at the moment you have some type of cancer, you are proposed today to have dendritic cell immunotherapy or T-cell immunotherapy. Unfortunately, you are proposed those treatments with the cells that are present. If you tell the doctor or the company that I have cells stored 20 years ago, I mean, they take it. It's part of the procedure. There's no things against it. I mean, it will be a common procedure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got two very quick announcements. Remember earlier in the evening we were talking about Deprenyl, and I was talking about how lucky I was to have a recommendation from Steve to see this fine doctor in Palo Alto. Well, that fine doctor is on our advisory board. I don't know if you knew that. And he has clients on Thursday nights, but he comes in late. So I wanted to introduce Alan Brower, who is this intelligent gentleman who always comes in late. Would you please stand up, Alan? So, if you're interested in Deprenyl or the use of natural precursors to increase neurotransmitters which might be deficient, and they often are, as we know, with depression and so forth, then I would definitely introduce yourself to Alan Brower and get his card. Now the other thing is that this wonderful hat that I have here that took 10 years off my life, here I am again. Now, what I'm going to do, first guy who... First guy who gives me $100 for the Smart Life Forum, I'll give him this hat. Okay? Okay, so $100 you get. I'm not going to tell you where you get this hat. You'll never find it. So if you come up with $100, give it to Sandy. I'll give you this hat. All right? And then take 10 years off your life. I guarantee it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I'll wait for Steve to give an extended answer to that question. Okay.
You're going to get a lot of exercise tonight. I have two questions. One comment, one question. There's a product called Halin 951, which is being studied now at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and it's done remarkable things for people with cancer. And Halin, H-A-E-L-A-N 951. That man would love to come and speak to us. It helps ALS, it helps repair DNA. They've got many studies in Europe. It's considered to be proven, but not in the United States, and they're willing to come here and talk about it, and I'd really love to hear them. The second thing is, does anybody know anything with positive breast cancer? How does bioidentical progesterone, if somebody's positive progesterone, does anybody have any information on that with the bioidentical progesterone?
If you already have it, you mean?
If somebody has if they had breast cancer that was estrogen positive, we know they have to stay away from the estrogens. But the progesterone, Dr. John Lee used to say that the progesterone mitigates the estrogens. But when somebody's got positive progesterone, how does the bioidentical progesterone affect that negatively or positively?
In other words, the breast cancer was also positive progesterone?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I would say that it shouldn't.
Well, no. Are there studies? Do we have anything?
Well, yes, Steve.
I can deal with that question from some perspective, and that is that the issue of the progesterone could, like estrogen, cause an increase in proliferation. So you'd want to assess it, but I think the most important consideration is making sure that when you take progesterone, that you measure to see if it converts into estrogen. This is the same thing that men have when they have prostate issues, cancer, prostate BPH, benign prostate hypertrophy. When they take testosterone, if it converts into estrogen, it can make their condition worse. And if it doesn't, it could make it better. And so you need to monitor that secondary transformation, because the body can convert progesterone into estrogen, it can convert testosterone into estrogen. You have to see if that's actually happening.
Yes?
After break, could you put the spelling on the board?
Sure. Yeah, okay, good. Yes, ma'am.
Do SSRI drugs such as Zoloft and Trazodone make Parkinson's worse?
Of course, you come to me for this. I have, all the people that I've worked with, none of them have used SRIs, and I generally tell them not to. However, there is an issue that happens in the relationship of dopamine to serotonin, and I will be covering that in my talk tonight. So if you have any more questions after that, certainly I can answer them.
Okay. By the way, I just happened to see Jonathan Wright, who's a really great doctor, and he was asked a question in his question column, is progesterone safe, or is it likely to be carcinogenic? And he said, if you take bioidentical progesterone, then it's as safe as the progesterone in your body when you're a young woman. So now, if you've had cancer, this is a different situation. But if you haven't had cancer, then progesterone is a good thing. It's one of the things the body depends on. And by the way, progesterone has a history of 1 million years. I mean, it's almost as old as life. It goes back to one-celled animals, and it's got a role in the biochemistry of practically every living thing on the earth. So if you get the bioidentical, the same molecule that your body produces when you're young, then you're in good shape. Unless you have a special situation like you do. Because, you know, once you have cancer, then you have to be super careful. Okay, another question, or comment.
Thank you, Phil. For those that have Parkinson's, the present thinking is that your dopamine decreases seriously. And it's necessary to, supposedly, to have a balance with acetylcholine. What is the best way to know what that balance should be, and how you decrease the other?
Okay, good, thanks.
In my opinion, there isn't a test. The test that really effectively gets at what's going on inside the brain is a spinal tap. And nobody in their right mind optionally does repeated spinal taps. So the method that I suggest to people is simple experimentation. If you're concerned about the cholinergic tone, try some cholinergic agents and just see if you get overstimulated. If you do, your neck muscles will tense up in here, get all tight and rigid. You may get a tension-related headache. You may get cramps in your calf muscles. And it's pretty obvious that this is over the top. And any of the neurotransmitters can be done on that basis of using either precursor loading, in other words, taking choline or phosphatidylcholine or DMAE, which is demethylated choline, to feed that, or tryptophan or 5-hydroxytryptophan to feed the serotonin pathway, or L-DOPA or tyrosine or phenylalanine to feed the norepinephrine and dopamine pathways. And so you can, in a sense, adjust your brain and the neurotransmitter levels in your brain, and then based on your own subjective feedback, how do you notice what's happening, and have your significant other notice from the outside, so that you get some objective feedback. You can make a judgment as to whether this is a good thing or a bad thing.
Steve. Now, by the way, those of you, I guess you all probably know by now, Steve is our science advisor, and he's an author of one of the authors of the Smart Drug books. Grace, you're going to hear him tonight. I always want to remind you that we have many, many wonderful doctors, but one of our other resources is Steve. He's listed on the sheet here. I hope you all pick it up at the break. And he works for a very reasonable fee, and will address your specific issues, just like Phil Millerwell, another wonderful guy. And we've got a whole bunch of people who we know for sure we can count on. So I've tried, in my humble opinion, to list the ones I know about. And by the way, when you come up with a really good doctor, tell me about him, and I'll put him on my list. Or you can pass out something yourself, because I mean, that table is available for everybody. We don't want commercial stuff on there too much, but we definitely want people's ideas about how to stay healthy. Okay, now let's see. Another comment, another question. Jim.
Just want to get my monthly plug here.
Good idea.
I just want to remind all of you that I do the videos for the last, almost 7 years, I think. It'll be 72 or 73, I'm losing count now. We have a list of all the videos down there at the table next to the DVDs, rather. And you can also find it on our website, smartlifeforum.org, as well as the details on all the speakers that we present. So because a lot of you want to maybe collect these things, I changed the pricing to go to 15 for one, and then 5 for 60, and 10 for 100. So that way you can start your own collection. And that information is as good as gold that was taken 6 years ago as what we're learning today.
That's definitely a great buy. And try it, and of course it takes work to sit there for an hour and a half. Yeah.
Is there any service for those of us who are moving away so we can have
definitely.
mail to us?
Definitely. You can get through the mail. Yeah. Now, how do you get it through the mail, Jim?
Just go to the website and you'll see my phone number.
Smart Life Forum, then you'll find.
Just give me a call. We'll take care of it.
Yeah. Good. Okay, now let's see. Maybe we ought to stop here and get Steve on. Let's take one more question or comment. Anybody? You hold on a second. Yes, sir.
Since it's the end and it's for your health, the Electric Auto Association is having a rally the 25th of August, and it's Saturday at Palo Alto High School. And it's from 10 to 4. And if we all drove electrics, we'd all be healthier.
All right. I'm driving a Prius, so I mean, I'm doing my part here. Okay.
100%.
Yeah, I know, you're talking 100%. Well, as soon as I can get one, I'm going to get one. Okay, let me bring up Don here to introduce Steve. This is the notorious Don Southard. Yes. We never know what he's going to say next, so I take no responsibility for what happens.
Thank you very much. Several things. Number one, Pam, the note that you gave me disappeared. I think it must have flown out the window. But as you may or may not know, the U.S. government is attempting to halt the use of supplemental DHEA. And, I beg your pardon? Again? Again, yes.
It's in vitamin research letter.
And this, from this monthly letter that Pam was kind enough to get to us from Vitamin Research News. Now, the founder of this company was Steve Fowkes. He said he hated business but loved science. And it's a magnificent website, and you can put on virtually anything, and it comes up there, and it is terribly scholarly, absolutely amazing. I go to it every single day. I pass it out to all of my friends. But I think it's very important that we contact some of our representatives. Now, the one that we have down in Monterey is a little brain dead, so it'll never get to him anyway. But we make the effort. Now, tonight, I think a dozen or 14 years ago, whenever it was that I first came to this organization, Stan Field called me and said, you have to get up to this place. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, come up. Some woman formed this thing, and there's a lot of good information. For years, I was reading medical books. I didn't know what I was reading, but I read them anyway. And as a result, I'd come up here because, you know, in medical terminology, every industry has its own language. The engineers have their language. Scientists have their language. We have our language in our business. But the medical language is extremely difficult to understand because there are so many things that mean exactly the same thing. So as a result, I came up here and somebody would mention something on one side of the room. Well, I'd try to memorize the person's face, and then during the break, I'd go running over to that individual and say, well, what do you mean by that? And one of the first things that I heard up here 12, 14 years ago was Deprenyl. And I said, what is Deprenyl? Now, as you know, there are 2 or 3 other words that mean the same thing. Selegiline, and what's the other one, Steve? Eldeprel. Okay, Selegiline, Eldeprel, Deprenyl. And so they said, well, gee, if you do this, it'll help and it'll extend life. So ever since then, I've been putting a couple of drops under my tongue every morning. Phil Miller comes up and he talks about natural testosterone, so I take natural testosterone. And all of these other, my wife thinks I'm nuts, and she's right about that. But there are 28 bottles there, and we just keep shoving these things in. Unfortunately, she thinks that I'm crazy, okay? And I'll say, well, we listen to, you know, the people that I'm listening to are doctors, the people I'm reading about are people with extensive backgrounds in this field, published, everything else. She says, but you don't know. I said, oh, honey, I taught college for 7 years. I know how to read, you know, and I listen to this, and I've gone through about 3,000 medical books. I went through Dr. Phil Miller's book, The Life Extension Revolution, and he put me on testosterone. He put me on Deprenyl. So the reason that I'm here this evening, and Phil, I want to thank you, because I have been encouraged to start a second family. Going on 82, but that's neither here nor. But I think it's vitally important because I started taking all of these things that you keep shoving me on, okay, and that Steve keeps putting me on. So I have decided. Now the problem is I need a willing partner. All right, now, As we all know, my standards are exceedingly high. Now, when I was a young man, I kept reading about, I'm a lover of history, so I kept reading about French and English and German history, and I noticed that all the monarchs always had a lot of handmaidens running around. And for the life of me, I could never find out a definition of what a handmaiden did. I know that they all had a lot of them, and so I think this is one avenue that we would like to pursue, because I would prefer to mate up with someone of royal blood. Perhaps somebody that has not been deflowered in this cursed world at this point. So what I'm trying to do, and I think that we can open this up, and I would like to put the contestants through a screening process, and so I tried to take perhaps the two pious people that I know, Mr. Hal Dunham back here in the pink shirt, and Mike Corrick will be the chairman of the committee. He's chairman of our morals committee here. And he has extremely high pledges, extremely high standards, and he's given up drink. He took the pledge last night. He needed a bracer this morning. For those that don't know him, Mike, if you can stand up, that's if you can, okay? So the screening process will go through Mike, all right? Now, once the wonderful offsprings take place, I'm going to, hopefully they're twins, I'm going to name one Steve, and I'm going to name one Phil. All right, in honor of these two fellas. What if they're girls? But I beg your pardon?
What if they're girls?
Well, we do what the Chinese do. We throw them in the river and start them.
Now you're in trouble.
Now we're in real trouble. That's right. But I think that, you know, amazingly enough, we have a wonderful guy here, and Steve Fowkes. Has been such an asset to this organization. He's been so extremely helpful to each and every one of them. Steve, will you come up and give us your presentation, if you will, on Deprenyl?
Wow. Second act. The libeled prosexual life-enhancing drug. Now, doesn't that get you to think about what I'm going to be talking about? So a bunch of scientists got together and decided to do an experiment. And they decided that rather than look at men sitting in a room with a full-screen television, looking at a football game, and run naked women past them to measure their sexuality, that they actually would try doing this with rats. And so this is what they did. They took a bunch of rats, and they, at their middle age, they tested each one of them and exposed the rat to a cooperating female and measured what happened. Some of the rats didn't even notice. These were the low-sex rats. Some of the rats would notice and would try to mount, but couldn't do anything. Those were the medium-sex rats. And some of the males could actually complete the sex act, and those were the high-sex rats. And so this is a comparative on the lifespan where they started the experiments. This is middle age, late middle age for humans. And so this is what happened on the group that was the low-sex rats. So they started dying just before 100% of their average lifespan. This is the group that is the medium-sex rats, and this is the high-sex rats. So you can see that sex is a good thing. Then they took the other half of the rats that they had stratified and gave them Deprenyl. And this is what happened. The low-sex rats, medium-sex rats, and high-sex rats. Deprenyl dramatically enhanced lifespan. So who wants to tell me the take-home message? Okay, here it is. Deprenyl is better than sex for lifespan purposes. He started it. Okay, Deprenyl is a dopaminergic drug. Oh, wow, this is cute. I should actually watch my presentations animate. Okay, so it's used primarily to treat Parkinson's disease. Has been for 40 years, longer than 40 years. And it also is used to treat Alzheimer's disease and depression. It enhances dopamine levels in the brain, which is, deals with drives, motivations, self-assertiveness, and is also connected to things like compulsiveness and obsessiveness. So that would be, if you take too much and you get your dopamine too high, that would be one of the side effects you might look for. The side effects are usually dose dependent, so if you give Deprenyl to somebody who's 20 years old, usually they have nothing but side effects. You give it to somebody who's 70 years old, and they usually get nothing but good benefits. So it is, I'll get into the dose issue later. But watch for is insomnia, sleep interference, irritability, externalization, blaming other people. It's not that I'm irritable, that they're irritating, that kind of thing. And obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors, you look for that. If you've already got it, then you look to see if you have more. It's an irreversible MAOB inhibitor, which means it has a long effect. It lasts for extended periods of time. You can take it every other day and get by just fine. Sublingual dosing and transdermal dosing are more effective than oral dosing, and that's how I use it, under the tongue in the morning. This is from a book that I was assistant editing, and Deprenyl is one of the drugs that's been shown to resensitize the hypothalamus. And this is a mechanism of neuroendocrine aging, and Deprenyl reverses that substantially along with these other compounds. This is just the list that was published in the Vladimir Dillman and Wardeen book. Wardeen was my co-author on the Smart Drugs 2 book. Deprenyl and age, we see, this is just a thematic diagram, we see a progressive decline in dopamine levels, and the decline is severe in Parkinson's disease. We can look at it as on this curve here. And so we get to a point where we have symptoms occurring, and the bottom symptom is death, and you have to get way down here before you actually die of a lack of dopamine, just because your brain isn't functioning. But it does happen. And so, most people, would die of low dopamine when they're 110 or 150 or 160, but never live that long to find out. But some people, their dopamine levels decline earlier, specifically in the central nervous system, and so when you get down to this point, you're not dead, but you develop Parkinson's symptoms. There's a whole host of motor issues and drive issues that are associated with Parkinson's disease. And then there's milder symptoms that usually happen to people who develop Parkinson's disease and other dopamine deficiency syndromes, which I will call an amotivational syndrome. Couch potatoism. Everybody should make up a new word every day.
Are there
So,
absolute levels? Good.
No, this is just a schematic. So this is showing you how, because Deprenyl drops with age, how age affects the dose. At young ages, there's no Deprenyl dose that's appropriate. You take some and you get side effects because your dopamine is already topped out. So I kind of put gas in the car. This tank is already filled. You spill it all over your shoes. But when you start to get up into the 30 and 40 range, you might become a candidate for it. Certain people who may be depressed at that age can respond to Deprenyl favorably. Other people might go directly into side effects and may need it later. I'm up in this range here, 2 to 4 milligrams a day, but I only take 1 milligram because I have a lot of dopaminergic tone naturally. I also have a lot of cholinergic tone naturally, so if I take DMAE, I go directly to a headache. So this is part of what I'll talk about, the designer brain concept in a minute, that you can figure out kind of how your brain works, how your neurotransmitter work, and in a sense, make your brain work the way you really want it to. And with Deprenyl, you get a dopamine tone, whether it's from Deprenyl or not. You get assertiveness. You get drives, improved drives in terms of your job and competitiveness, getting things done. In terms of sex, as a drive. increases sex. One of the things that I really enjoyed learning about was in one of the original studies that they did of Parkinson's disease, when they gave L-DOPA, which also raises dopamine levels, but may be more dangerous to do it that way, that all the female nurses complained because the male patients were molesting them. And this happened with the rats. They were given Deprenyl. They all developed their full interest in sex again. And so it was like they were rejuvenated to, you know, not teenage levels, but, you know, young adult levels. This is a representation of a slide that I produced, or a diagram that I produced for an article I wrote called The Designer Brain. This was probably 10 years ago. This was based on my personal experience with dopamine compounds like Deprenyl and L-DOPA, and serotonin compounds like tryptophan and 5-hydroxytryptophan, to where I would try to determine what it was doing to my mind and what it was doing to my emotional tone. And this is how I graphed out different things. Some of these things out here on the side, I didn't actually try psychosis. Didn't try it on. But I had read a lot about it and understood it as being a high dopamine, low serotonin condition. So if you drive dopamine way to an extreme, you get psychosis, in a milder state irritability, and an even milder state self-assertiveness, that when you switch over to serotonin, you get self-transcendence. And this is basically aspects of religion and spirituality is the self-transcendent side of things. A little bit milder form, tranquility, calmness, as states where your serotonin tone is higher than your dopamine tone. And so down here we have apathy. This is the couch potato syndrome. And so low serotonin and low dopamine, you're depressed, and you're suicidally depressed. If it's just low dopamine, you're just not motivated. You may be relatively happy, but you don't feel like getting up and mowing the lawn, or, you know, fixing something on the honey-do list, or making love with your husband, or whatever it is. This issue is mainly discussed in the literature in terms of male sexuality, but females do have a connection to dopamine in their sexuality, but not all women notice that dominantly, but most women notice it in the area of assertiveness. One reason your doctor may not know about Deprenyl is that in 1992 there was a contamination event that took place. The Deprenyl supply was being made in Eastern Europe, and some contaminated Deprenyl was distributed all over Europe and all over the United States. And hundreds of Parkinson's patients died. But the data, when it was displayed in a scientific study that happened to be going on at the same time, this was obscured by this particular graph. This is what was published in the British Medical Journal, and this shows the increased Deprenyl mortality. 60% increased mortality. And they figured that they explained it this way, this would go over, and it actually did. You know, the vast majority of doctors and scientists accepted this finding that Deprenyl was associated with a increased mortality risk and stopped prescribing it to their patients. All the earlier studies that were done were 1-year studies or 2-year studies, and 6 of those studies had shown a delay in the severity and advancement of Parkinson's disease. All 6 of them. This was the exception. And there were several aspects of the study that were badly designed. One is that they didn't reduce the cinnamon. This is the DOPA-only group. They didn't reduce that when they gave them Deprenyl, and they were supposed to. Everybody did that. They just didn't do it in this particular study. Well, this is what we would have expected. So I looked at this and said, something is hinky with this data. Something happened here in this vicinity where all of a sudden these groups are tracking together, and all of a sudden they diverge very, very suddenly. This is nonlinear data. It's not. This is what you'd expect if this were gradual, and we didn't see that. So I decided to look at it more closely, and I recognized that it was a 1-year period. All of this 60% increased mortality happened in 1 year. This is a 6-year study. 1 year, all these people died. The rest of the time, their death rate was normal. So I looked at it. This is my quick and dirty analysis before I would actually ask for the data. And so if we take out this data here, this rise, we subtract it, drop it down, exactly the same death rate. So I called this the window of death, and I asked the people at the British Medical Journal and the study people if I could have access to the raw data, and the answer was no. So what I did is I did a mathematical analysis where I did the slope. At every point, I took this graph out of their journal and magnified it, huge, and went and took all the slope measurements from it. And this is the rate of death. So this is what I got out of it. This is what you can see. The death rate all of a sudden spikes. And then a year later, it's back to normal. So this is what we would have expected. 29 months, an event happens. By 30 months, the death rate is 8 times higher, 16 times baseline. 35 months is halfway back again. 41 months, it's back into the normal range. This is not what happens with a drug. There's no example of this that's ever happened in the history of pharmacology. So if without this event, this is what we would have seen, this curve right here, and the death rates would have been comparable. And the reason that it didn't show the advantage, the green line is what they should have done if they had actually dropped the dose of Sinemet in response to adding Deprenyl. The green line is what they would have seen. And this would have confirmed the other 6 studies that had been there. So this is why your doctor may not know anything about the Deprenyl and may actually recommend against your use of it. So, questions? Yes? Yes, in my newsletter. It's actually available for free on the Siri.com site. It's all laid out in the Parkinson's disease menu, including the testimony that was supposed to be given to the guy who actually invented the only guaranteed toxin-free Deprenyl process in the world. The U.S. federal government put him in prison. And so the testimony that I was supposed to offer at that trial that was disallowed by the judge is also on the site. So if you'd like to read some of the dirty laundry about exactly how this was supposed to be presented, it's there.
With the life extension, what's the attitude of the life extension?
They accepted that finding, but I didn't publish my findings. They took a position that only low-dose Deprenyl should be used, but they took that position within months of that study coming out, and I didn't get around to publishing this for 3 years. So this was not something that I saw right away, and I had to really look at this data several times before I could make this analysis. So as far as I know, they haven't come up with any new policy based on this point of view, but they've been fans of Deprenyl before that, significant fans of it.
Also, will it help against Parkinsonism and stroke?
Probably. I think that it would probably be useful for strokes in general, regardless of whether they're associated with Parkinson's disease. One of the things that's been observed by some practitioners is that men who take Deprenyl, their testosterones tend to spontaneously go up. But there's also a pro-mitochondrial influence as well, that when you take any kind of dopaminergic, there's a direct stimulatory effect on the expression of proteins in the nucleus and in the mitochondria that result in mitochondria having a higher energy. So it's like raising your voltage. So as we age, we go from 110 volts down to 100, and then 90, and at some point between 90 and 70, we start to lose our oomph. And then when you take Deprenyl, or you take any kind of dopaminergic, it tends to go back up again. Or if you take a mitochondrial nutrient, it tends to go back up again. And so Deprenyl is just one way to deal with that particular kind of issue. Yes?
What do you consider low dose?
For Deprenyl? Well, I would say it's low in comparison to an expectation. So my dose is low because I would normally be taking about 3 milligrams a day and only taking 1. But I would say, another way to approach that is, if you can tolerate 4 milligrams and you're only taking 2 or 1, then that's a low dose. So it would all come down to what your individual reaction to it is. And so, if you want to be conservative, you can just take a quarter of what you might prefer, or to take a quarter of it on a regular basis and just take extra when you were going to go on vacation, you want to have more fun than usual or something like that. So it can be used episodically, yes.
And do you tend to see the mitochondrial effect and the testosterone elevation in females as well?
Good question. I don't know. Maybe some of the clinicians in here who've experimented with Deprenyl might know that. But I've never seen any data on testosterone in women from Deprenyl. Yes?
I think you want to mention the antioxidant effect properties of this for those who don't fit in the other categories.
Yeah, there is antioxidant and pro-oxidant effects that appear to be associated with Deprenyl. I don't know how significant those are in terms of theoretical anti-aging program, whether that would be a reason to take it or not. I think the evidence that Deprenyl is associated with benefits in the neuroendocrine aging system are very clear, and in other areas it may not be so clear.
How can you get it without a prescription?
You can get any drug you want without a prescription if you're willing to open yourself up to a possible misdemeanor violation by just importing it, as long as the drug is not a controlled substance. And it's very important, because if it is a controlled substance, it's not a misdemeanor, it's a felony. But the FDA has a special policy allowing for importation for personal use, and you can import it on that basis. But one of their criteria is, it's not illegal, this is just a guideline by the FDA, is that you be under medical supervision. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you go to your doctor and say, I'm taking Deprenyl, then that could be considered medical supervision, because you go to your doctor annually for a physical. But what I would say would be is if you talk to your doctor and say, well, you supervise my use of Deprenyl, and they say yes, and then you bring it in, there's no prescription, your doctor doesn't necessarily have any liability at all for saying that they provide supervision, because they're just protecting you from your own folly. And that's a legitimate medical thing that nobody's going to really object to. And then you just bring it in from outside the country. And then all your problem is dealing with customs. Let's try the other side, okay? In the back.
I'm sorry if I missed your remarks about this, but what hematologist patients have, using Deprenyl, have addictive sexual gambling or other types of
None.
None.
Yeah.
What about neuropets?
It's receptor specific in some way that I don't understand. Do you have any commentary on that?
I think neuropets, what it does is it sensitizes the receptors, so they're just more rejuvenated. So you can use lower doses of the other drugs.
Yeah. This has been noted. It's a big problem. Sex addiction, gambling addiction, purchasing addiction, these kinds of behaviors. I think it's relating to this obsessive-compulsive tendency for dopaminergics in general, but it's much more focused. And I think that's probably because there's some kind of selective effect on different receptor categories in the dopamine realm. And this has also been observed in SRIs, the different kinds of side effects that are specific to, the different subreceptors in the serotonin system. But it's never been noted. The behaviors that have been observed in terms of men are universal. It pretty much affects all the male patients that way. There is some effect in the literature. I don't know if I've ever seen anybody talk about it, but one of the things that happened is that some of the women got pregnant. Some of the female Parkinson patients who were on Cinemet got pregnant, and these were postmenopausal women too. So this neuroendocrine rejuvenation actually can cause women to go back through menopause and start ovulating again. So this is, a significant anti-aging mechanism. Yes.
So in the dose, Steve, of like say 1 milligram a day for X number of years, like 5 or 7 years, there really isn't any severe side effects documented in the literature, is it?
No. I mean, not that I have discussed or experienced, anybody else has reported to me, unless you're young. I had a 26-year-old associate editor working for me who took 5 milligrams of Deprenyl once and didn't sleep for 3 days. And I have to say, he was much more obnoxious than usual. Not just because of the sleep deprivation, just because he was just, you know, manic and edgy and very focused. He got more work done in that 3 days than he would normally do in 2 weeks, so it wasn't a total wash. But he never took Deprenyl again. I also did take some Jumex brand Deprenyl that was from Europe through a company called Interlab, and had a horrendous reaction to it. And then a week later, I took 5 milligrams, this is 5 milligrams of Jumex, or supposedly Jumex, and from Interlab, and then 5 milligrams of the Discovery brand liquid Deprenyl, which was the highly pure form, and that just overstimulated me. I didn't have the cognitive dysfunction, inability to write, inability to sleep. I mean, it's certainly true that I had to take tryptophan to get to sleep that night, but I still slept fairly well. So there was a toxic effect from that counterfeit Deprenyl that I didn't have from regular Deprenyl. So that's what I tell people regarding this potential contaminant. If it's in the Deprenyl supply, the way you find out, since we don't have testing that the FDA can do in this entire process, the toxic agent in this drug that killed all those people was never identified, that the way you find out is by taking a bunch of different brands. So when you start up Deprenyl, pick something like Elderpril, which in my opinion is the US brand least likely to be toxic because it was the one that was toxic in the past. And then they stopped importing it from Europe and started making it in Puerto Rico under their own control and specifications. So they cleaned up their act big time. And so, if you take that, get used to it, and then you switch to a generic, where you just swap 5 milligrams for 5 milligrams, then the question is, does anything bad happen? Do you get headaches? Do you feel somehow that this is different in some way? And if you can discriminate it, then go back to the one that you think is the best one and try different brands and see. And there are several brands that are made, even Jumex brand is made in like 6 different countries throughout the world. So it's not, it matters where you get it as to, you know, the issue of the purity and safety issue. So, yes?
Was this toxic Deprenyl responsible for that 1-year window?
Yes.
So I thought you were saying, you ended up saying just because they didn't decrease the cinnamon.
Well, that would result in a long-term toxic effect. And that was, in my opinion, observed because all the earlier studies showed a beneficial effect, a decrease in mortality from Deprenyl. This is the first study that didn't show that and showed an increase in mortality. But what I'm saying is that 60% was due to a 6-month window. I mean, that's
so it wasn't just because they didn't decrease the...
No. The reason that there wasn't a mortality decrease was because they didn't decrease the cinnamon. So they were basically overstimulating these Parkinson patients. And my studies have led me to the conclusion that Cinemet actually accelerates the Parkinson's disease process. The mechanism at the cellular level, the cytotoxic effect, is accelerated by Deprenyl. And therefore, one should only use Cinemet, which is L-dopa, as a last resort. Bill, did you want to agree or disagree with that conclusion?
I'm not sure I can disagree. The Parkinson's is a progressive disease, and at a certain point you have to bring in certain drugs and you have a balance.
Yeah.
And so you have to use things appropriately. The point is you try to bring in at least the most toxic ones at the very last.
Yeah. That's what I consider L-dopa to be one of the most toxic ones, although I'm not convinced that in everybody that L-dopa is necessarily risky. There may be people for whom there's not enough iron in the brain, for example, to promote the free radical reactions, or the antioxidant defense system may be slightly better, so that the reason L-dopa is dangerous for free radicals is because it's the most sensitive of the neurotransmitters. It's got...
In that whole story with Parkinson's, you mixed up a couple words. I think you should say that again.
Okay. What were those words I mixed up?
I think you said something when you meant L-dopa, and you said something else when you meant Deprenyl.
Okay. Well, L-dopa is Cinemet. Cinemet is L-dopa plus carbidopa, which is an inhibitor that prevents the L-dopa from being metabolized in the bloodstream so that more of it gets into the brain. And that's the basis of the prescription drug. So basically, Cinemet and L-dopa are synonymous with each other. And L-dopa is the natural precursor to make dopamine. So this is what the brain converts. And phenylalanine has no hydroxy group on it. Tyrosine has 1 hydroxy group on it, and dopamine has 2. And those hydroxy groups activate the ring to free radicals. So L-dopa and and dopamine are the most sensitive of those neurotransmitters. And if you want to make soluble melanins, which is taking those amino acids and polymerizing them, and this is used for a drug, the easiest way to do it is just dump a bunch of L-DOPA in a fish tank, turn on the bubbler, and in 24 hours you'll have melanins. It's that sensitive. Whereas tyrosine takes weeks to develop the same level of polymerization. Yes?
In talking about toxic effects and negative reactions, when people have certain reactions, sometimes they'll take an injection or they'll take a pill. So if any of the reactions are considered negative by a spouse or the individual, what are the...
Document it. Just document it so that you can put it on the scale, pros and cons. Every time you take a drug or a nutrient...
Can't take a shot to...
You mean counteract the side effects?
Exactly.
Oh, sure. If you are serotonin weak and you take, Deprenyl, it's going to raise your dopaminergic tone and your serotonin isn't going to be there to balance it. You're going to have a greater profile of side effects. So you can take Deprenyl to raise your dopamine and 5-hydroxytryptophan to raise your serotonin so that you keep them in balance with each other. So, that's the idea.